absolutely anyone can reach Unreal, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how. I truly believe that no matter how good or bad you are, with a bit of patience and a good strategy, you can reach Unreal in Fortnite. In this video, I'm going to explain the very basics of how to rank up fast by guiding you through a ranked match from start to finish and explaining the best strategies for every phase of the match. This video is going to be specifically for Fortnite builds, so if you're a no-build player, while a lot of these tips will still help you out, I don't really think this is the video for you. If you enjoy this video or find it helpful at any point, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, check out other videos on my channel, or comment on the video. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. First, let me explain when you should start using this strategy. I would say that everyone has a certain rank that they can reach without any problems, and only at that point do they get stuck. For me personally, that's like around mid-elite. Until that point, I basically just W key and fight everyone that I see and just kind of try to have fun with it. And only then will I try to play a little bit more patiently, a bit more strategically, and actually try to win the matches that I'm playing. And that's exactly how you should do it too. Try to get as high as possible by just playing the game normally and just having fun and getting a couple of kills. And once you reach a rank where you can't do that anymore, that's when you should start using the strategy that I'm going to show to you now. Now we need to understand how ranked works. For every match that you play, you get percentages, and when you reach 100%, you rank up. If you have a bad match, you lose percentage, and if you have a good match, depending on your performance, you gain percentage. It is absolutely fine to lose some percentage here and there, but obviously in the long run, our goal is to gain percentage as much as possible. So what do you get percentages for? There are two ways you can get percentages. The first one is kills, and the other one is placement points. The first one is pretty self-explanatory, but kills do not really give you that much percentage. In the higher ranks, you don't even get 1% per kill. So what you really want to focus on is placement. Basically what this means is that you don't want to die early in the game, but rather you want to survive as long as possible and potentially even win the game at the end. Naturally, a win gives you the most percentage, but honestly, if you can get to top 10 consistently, you will be able to rank up. So now that you know how ranked works, let's go through each and every phase of the match and let me explain to you the best way of playing it out. Starting with the early game. The early game is by far the most dangerous part of the match. First of all, you don't really have anything, you don't have any mats, you don't have good loot, you don't have any heals, and thus if you're not being careful, you can die pretty quickly. And also if you do die, you will absolutely lose percentage. So what's the best approach to early game? The most important thing for early game is your drop spot. Honestly, there are tons of good drop spots on the map, and I will not go into detail on that right here. If you want a good video on drop spots, you can just look it up on YouTube. There's tons of videos on the topic. But let's just say, if you really want to play for placement, you should try to find a rather secluded area that isn't contested very often. Personally, I use this drop spot right here. I can only recommend it since there's tons of loot, there's metal, there's slurp barrels, there's a lot of good stuff that you can find here, and it's relatively central on the map. But keep in mind that this drop spot will be contested from time to time. Something you should keep in mind when landing in is that anytime you notice that you're being very contested or that you're being outdropped, you can always change where you want to drop. Don't just try to 50-50 people off spawn, especially if you're not that good, but be smart with where you land. Something good about this drop spot right here is that if you notice that the main spot is being contested or you're being outdropped, you can just steer a little bit to the left over here, and this is still a very good secondary spot to land on. These kind of secondary options are always good to have. Your main goal for early game is to set you up for mid and late game. This basically means that you need to farm up materials, find heals, and find good loot. It is not always necessary to find perfect loot in order to be able to be successful, but there are a couple of things that you should always try to find before moving on to mid-game. The most important thing is obviously a shotgun and maybe an AR, but also you should try to find some heals and some movement. When it comes to the latter, you really have to figure out what your preferences are. I would say that the best movement items in this meta currently are the kneecapper baseball bat and the shockwave grenades. Also, in early game, you can sometimes get a couple of free kills. For example, when you notice that you clearly outdrop someone, or you can just take them by surprise, you can try to get that kill. But keep in mind that there's a risk of dying there, and that kills in early game give even less percentage. Getting a kill in mid or late game gives you more percentage than in early game. Thus, you always have to consider whether or not it's really worth taking the risk. At the end of early game, ideally you should have decent loot, heals, and mats. And now you should try to find a hiding spot, because that's what you're going to be doing for most of the match, just hiding and trying to avoid fights. The hiding spot that I usually opted for here on my landing spot was in the roof of this little house down here, but honestly there's many different hiding spots that you can use. Bushes are always a good hiding spot because people usually don't check them, and even if they do, you can pretty much surprise them and get a free kill. But you can basically use any random building or hide in a car. Technically, you could also box up and hide in your own builds, but if you do that, it's very likely that some W key sweat will just push you and you have to fight. And that's something you want to avoid as much as possible. This already concludes early game, and now we can move on to mid game. Now, mid game is most of the time the most boring part of the match. But a good mid game is crucial to being able to place high consistently. The best case scenario is that the zone just always pulls to where you're hiding in the first place, and therefore you don't really have to do much other than just sitting in your building, not making a sound, and just not trying to fight anyone. In that case, I usually just watch something on the side like a YouTube video or a TV show and just chill and wait for the endgame to arrive. But what if the zone does not pull to where you're hiding? Well, in that case you have to change the hiding spot and make a rotation. Now intuitively, you might say that the best thing to do would be to just find out where the border of the circle is and then just move to that border, basically just barely making it into circle and then finding a hiding spot right there. While sometimes that can work out, it is much better to plan ahead and get a good position in the circle. The best position for all mid-game zones is near to the center, but on the dead side of the zone. Now, what does dead side mean? In every Fortnite match, there will be one side of the zone where most players will be, which is called the congested side, and one side where there won't be that many players, which is called the dead side. If you want to go for kills, obviously the congested side is the place to be, but since we're trying to avoid fights, you should try to get to dead side. So how do you identify dead side? I think this is best shown with an example. If you see right here, the circle pulled in a way that I could simply stay where I am, but I decide that it would be better to get a better position. So why are we in a bad position right here? As you can see, the circle pulls to the bottom right corner of the map. What this means is that anyone who's still not around this bottom right corner of the map will have to rotate towards that direction. If you look at my position now, you can see that we are one of those people that aren't in the bottom right corner. This means that even if we stay here, in the long run we're going to have to move towards that corner. So instead of waiting and having to rotate with everyone else, I'll try to get a head start and rotate right away. Since this is quite far away and I don't really have any movement, I decide to take a car, which makes my rotate much faster and much safer. As you can see right here, as soon as I reach a position that I consider to be good, I find a new hiding spot. In this case, I'll just use a bush. As soon as I'm in the bush, I check the map to see what kind of position I'm in. As you can see with the way the circle is right now, we are in the center but slightly towards the side that the circle is pulling towards. This is exactly where you want to be. Also note that I leave my car nearby so that whenever I have to rotate again, I can simply just use the car again. Now, as soon as I'm not in the circle again or I'm simply in a bad position, I'll immediately open my map to find a good position, which is mostly dead side, and then I'll rotate towards that position again. An easy rule of thumb to identify dead side is to simply see where the circle is pulling towards. In this case, it pulls towards the bottom right corner, thus the dead side will be on the bottom right corner. I then immediately highlight where I want to go with a marker on the map and start my rotation. So as you can see, it's simply just a rinse and repeat of the same steps over and over again. You see where circle pulls, then you identify a good position, which is mostly dead side, and then you rotate towards that position, find a new hiding spot, sit in that hiding spot, and then you do it again. In this game, because of the smart positioning that I did, I was able to completely avoid fights until the very last player, which enabled me to win the match. This just goes to show how important the mid game is. There's one last thing I have to mention before moving on to end game, and that is, how do you get kills in mid game? If you're a crazy W keyer, you can basically just fight anyone, but I suppose since you're watching this video, that's not necessarily who you are. As I said, usually we want to completely avoid fights, but sometimes on your rotations you might stumble upon some people already fighting. Often, especially if you have good loot, this is a great opportunity to third party. Very often you can just use an AR, the mammoth pistol, or the grenade launcher to get a kill on 2 or more people fighting. Since they're fighting, sometimes they're very low and you can just easily get a kill without risking of having to take a fight yourself. But you should keep in mind that you don't really want to engage in a full-on fight. What you should do then is to test the waters basically. So maybe if you're using a car, drive up to the fight, shoot a bit and try to see if you can get a quick kill. But as soon as they see you and fight back, you should probably try to run. This is also why it's so important to always have movement and or a car on your side, so that anytime it gets tricky you can just get out of that situation. And now that you understand how to play the mid game, we can finally move on to the last part, the end game. I would say that the end game usually starts at around 15 or 10 people still alive. Ranked games are mostly not that stacked, so with this strategy, getting like a top 10 placement is not that difficult most of the time. And honestly, if you made it this far into the match, it is incredibly likely that you're gonna gain some percentage. But if you didn't get any kills or only like 1 or 2, in the higher ranks, it's probably only going to be between 1 and 3%. Thus, if you really want to make some quick progress, getting wins is absolutely crucial. As I said, you don't have to get wins, but if you don't, it's gonna take much longer. This is also the point in the match where being a better player will be rewarded, because obviously the better you are, the easier it is going to be to get a bunch of kills in late game and then win the game. I won't be able to provide a full-on end game guide here, because that would go beyond the scope of this video, but I will give you some tips that should at least enable you to survive longer in end games and maybe get a win here and there. The tricky part about endgame is that since the zones become smaller and smaller, it's going to become increasingly more difficult to avoid players. This is where the movement items and heals that you collected throughout early and mid game will be crucial. If you didn't have a good early or mid game, this is going to be the point at the very latest where you're going to notice how difficult it is to survive without proper equipment. This does not mean that you're not going to be able to be successful in endgame, but it's going to be much harder. Generally, your gameplay plan and strategy do not really change in comparison to mid-game. You're going to try to avoid fights as much as possible, but endgame is also going to be a great place to get some third-party kills, since people are going to be fighting much more. Similarly to how you approached fights in mid-game, I would recommend to just test the waters, try to see if you can get a free kill, and if you don't, just move on. Keep track of your materials and heals and movement items, and if you notice that at any point during late game you run out of a certain resource, you can still farm up mats or try to find loot that is still spread out across the map. Ideally, you want to enter the last couple of fights with somewhat decent mats and heals and some movement. Now, the most important part about endgame is to stay ahead of zones. Obviously, as long as you're just boxed up, you're technically completely safe from dying, but since in endgames you sometimes have to do far rotations and there will be a lot of players on the way, it is smart to keep track of the zones and try to stay ahead. In endgame, something like dead side rotates aren't as important anymore. It is much more important to just get into a safe position as quickly as possible without getting beamed on the way. If you're actually reaching the point where there's only 3 or 4 other people alive, one tip I can give you is to let the others fight. As soon as they're fighting, you can still try to intervene and maybe get a third-party kill, but you should prioritize getting into good positions, reserving mats and heals, and just letting the others do the dirty jobs. If now you're entering the final 1v1, it will obviously come down to who's the better player, and I'm not going to provide a fighting guide here. So let's just say, if you want to get better at winning the last 1v1s, you should just try to get better in general and do a lot of creative 1v1s as well. But even if you only get like a top 5 finish with maybe 1 or 2 kills, that is already going to give you quite a bit of percentage. And if you actually manage to win the game, no matter how many kills you have, even in Champion you're gonna get a bunch of percentage, and after a while you're going to be able to reach Unreal. To end this video, I just want to say that you should really consider whether or not it's worth for you grinding out to Unreal, because especially if you're not that good and you can't really get wins that often, it's gonna take a long fucking time. And in the end, who really cares about what rank you are? As I said, I think that anyone can reach Unreal if they really just put in the time. In my opinion, getting to a high rank is more about the time you invest rather than your skill. So really, is it gonna be worth all the time and all the raging? Then again, I do this to myself every season as well, so who am I to judge? But if you're up for a challenge and you got some spare time left, with the strategies in this video, I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to reach Unreal. just be prepared to invest a lot of time. Alright, that's gonna wrap it up for today's video, guys. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful at any point, please be sure to leave a like and a comment and subscribe to the channel. If you still have any questions left, feel free to ask them in the comment section. And if you want to check out any of my other videos, feel free to do so as well. I also live stream on TikTok, so if you want to see me play live, you can check that out as well. The link is going to be in the description. Alright, that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.